So this week we're looking at a couple of essays which I was led to choose for this class because of the events in Hold Paramount, chapters 4 and 5, and our character Chris's problem with this structure, this hotel, problem that he's discovered. I'd like to look first at this essay by Kipnis, Engineers Who Kill, Professional Ethics and the Paramountcy of Public Safety. I think it's an extremely interesting essay, and a very interesting essay to read now that we've been thinking about this problem that Chris, this fictional character Chris, has encountered, and what he or she should do. And I think that if we look at chapters 4 and 5 of Hold Paramount, I would say the main consideration for us is whether Chris's way of handling it is ethically defensible. And it's hard not to read these essays, for me at least, in light of that fictional account and looking to them for some help. I think, in fact, that maybe that's not the right thing to do, actually, and I'll explain why. Or it may be the right thing to do, but it may not be fair to the authors of these essays. And in the course of what I have to say about them, I hope to explain why. Engineers Who Kill, a very interesting essay, and I think it helps us to think about the whole paramount canon of various engineering codes. The engineer shall hold paramount the health, safety, and welfare of public, so on and so on. The first, I think, helpful thing that Kipnis says about this canon is to ask whether it is an ideal or a principle, and that's an important question. I really do. He says that it's both, and I think he may be right about that. But what's the difference? I mean, what in practice would be the upshot of that difference between something being an ideal and something being principle? Well, an ideal is something we strive after. It's something that it's a goal. It's an ideal to emulate and try to achieve. And one could say that the whole purpose of engineering, if it has a social purpose, is to add to the health, safety, and welfare of the public, to create and implement new technologies or old technologies which improve the welfare of the public, make life better, and also do so in such a way that perhaps they make life safer, and at the very least don't put people unnecessarily in harm's way. But as he says, you really couldn't be called to account for not, in your engineering career, contributing a heck of a lot to the good of mankind, to the health, safety, and welfare of the public. And it's something that you should do. But certainly, if you really didn't do much or anything to that effect, you wouldn't be held, you wouldn't be thought to have violated anything. You just had failed to live up to perhaps the utmost of what you could have done as an engineer, perhaps. But if we consider the whole paramount canon to be a principle, to be a standard of action, rather than an ideal, then it could be something that could be much more concrete in terms of something that could actually be violated. Let me read a little bit of what he says. He says of the whole paramount canon, and yet because it is an ideal, the engineer who cannot point to any way in which he or she has contributed to improving safety, health, or welfare is not thereby convicted of unprofessional or unethical conduct. This is on page 79. If a charge of unethical conduct is to be warranted, there must be a principle of professional conduct that can be violated. And if it's an ideal, it can't really be violated. You can fail to live up to it, but you can't violate it. On the other hand, if it is a principle, that's a different story. He says, if engineers are required to hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public, does that mean that there are specific acts that engineers are not permitted to perform? Is there a point at which the conduct of an engineer is professionally unacceptable, given the language of the codes? Unacceptable rather than uninspiring, let's say, in case of an ideal. The answer seems to be that, though engineers are not culpable if they merely fail to make contributions to public safety and the rest, They are culpable if they act as a clear menace, and that's really the most important line in the whole essay. To hold paramount to safety, health, and welfare of the public precludes, at least in most cases, acting so as to undermine those values. So if we're going to consider the whole paramount canon as something that we can actually call engineers to account for violating, what we're really saying is that engineers, despite everything else that they should or shouldn't do, should not act as a menace. They should not act as a menace, and that is really indicated in the title of the essay, Engineers Who Kill. If you kill, you are a menace. So he says then at the bottom of page 79, in what follows I shall begin the task of fleshing out what is meant by acting as a menace. And that really constitutes most of the rest of the essay, is trying to formulate a principle that will clearly express that duty not to act as a menace. And of course, I think it's rather complicated. The first version of that principle, which is given on page 80, it's called P1. Engineers shall not participate in projects that subject others to a risk of death. For various fairly obvious reasons, that gets rejected, because that would actually paralyze, I would imagine, much engineering, since some risk of death is associated with a lot of technologies. That is, technologies are dangerous, and if we were to say that no engineer could participate in any project that subjected others to a risk of death, that would eliminate a heck of a lot of engineering, I would imagine. So that principle has to be adjusted, obviously, to fit practice, and it gets reformulated to P2. Engineers shall not participate in projects that degrade ambient levels of public safety. And I think that's meant to say, well, you can create something, implement a technology that may actually hurt or kill somebody, but you can do that morally, but you can't make the world less safe in general as a result of your project. And he gives some examples. Actually gives an example of a surgeon, which may not be really pertinent here, but the idea is a surgeon could perform some necessary surgery that would subject the patient to risk of death, but that may be justified because it may actually be giving the patient a better chance to live. But even this degrade ambient levels of public safety adjustment turns out to be insufficient, because you may, in general, increase the ambient level of safety, but you may be putting specific individuals at risk. And he gives you certain, looking at page 81, certain scenarios in which that's true. And what it turns out, I think, at the end of these reformulations of this principle not to act as a menace, what Kipnis arrives at is the element of consent. That is, it may be that putting individuals at risk may be okay, as long as the individuals are informed of that risk, and they consent to running the risk, to being exposed to the risk. And that is really, really important, isn't it? For various reasons regarding the difficulties of the mechanism of obtaining informed consent, Kipnis arrives in page 82 at the final formulation of the first principle, this principle of not acting as a menace. Engineers shall not participate in projects that degrade ambient levels of public safety unless information concerning those degradations is made generally available. That is, engineers, in his mind, are not responsible either for informing the public or for obtaining consent from the public, but they are responsible for informing the kind of authorities that would be expected to inform the public, government agencies, whomever it is, that would be in a better place to get that information out. But that You can't participate in a project that does degrade ambient levels of public safety unless you can be assured that that information of that risk has become what he said in terms as generally available. So, very, very interesting, I think, but it gives us, some sort of idea, I think, of, maybe a more concrete idea of what the whole paramount canon actually says and what it's meant to, at least in this author's opinion, to preclude, and that is engineers endangering people, being a menace, with various qualifications. Now, I can't help but think of Chris's situation here in Hope Paramount, and I'll tell you, my concern with this essay is the narrowing of the duty to non-participation in such projects. That is, what Kipnis seems to be saying is that the engineer cannot ethically participate in such a project. That is, that if you are engaged or find out that a project that you're participating in or called upon to participate in your professional judgment, puts the public at risk and does not inform the public of that risk so that they can be reasonably expected to make their own decisions, that you can't participate in that project. Well, of course, in Hope Paramount, we have a situation where an engineer is looking at a completed project that was done by other engineers, and in which he or she had no actual part in creating, in designing or creating, but run some tests which show that the completed structure, in their professional opinion at least, is unsafe, is unacceptably dangerous. So what are Chris's duties or obligations there? Well, I don't know. Kipnis has some interesting things to say, and I don't know how satisfactory they are, but I'll read you what he says at the bottom of page 82. He says, notice that this principle, the foregoing first principle, does not require that engineers convey information about hazards to either the public or appropriate public officials. Engineers could, however, comply with the principle by doing so. The principle requires merely that engineers not participate in the covert degradation of public safety. And obviously, that's the situation in chapters 4 and 5 of Hope Paramount, a covert degradation of public safety. That is a lowering of the public's safety, or an increase in its risk. That's covert. That is not public. It's not information not being shared. The obligation not to participate in the killing of others is much stronger than the obligation to prevent others from killing. So this leaves us kind of up in the air about, well, what about the way that Chris actually does resolve this situation in chapter 5, where he or she simply asks to be taken off the project and is, so he doesn't participate in it. But then the question is, does he owe an additional duty to inform the public, to let people know that this thing is unsafe? But the line between these two obligations, that is, between not participating in a dangerous project and informing the public of the danger, the line between these two obligations may be blurred in cases where one discovers that one has participated in the covert degradation of public safety. Now it is too late to withdraw. One's job is completed. In these cases, where one shares responsibility for the creation of a life-threatening hazard, the principle does create a duty to warn those at risk. So say that Chris had participated in the creation of this overhang or canopy in this hotel, and later had discovered that it was this thing that he had helped build was a hazard. Then he would have a duty to inform the public of the risk. But he hasn't. He hasn't really participated. And his total participation is looking over the work for one night of another engineer. Kipnis continues, this is top of page 83, this is not to say that engineers are never obligated to publicize hazards that they did not help to create. To specify the conditions under which engineers have such obligations would require analysis and principles that are beyond the scope of this paper. So we actually get no help from Kipnis in terms of that. And, that's disappointing, I guess. But again, I think that maybe it would be a little unfair to read it in such a way that we required Kipnis to answer all our questions about something else that we had read.